Hello, how's it going? Instead of tea today, I'm gonna have some ginger ale. Bit too early for a beer, but it's warm outside. I just went for a run, and I'm gonna have some ginger ale in a Bailey's glass. It's gingery. Um, it's interesting that the ginger ale over in England is really spicy. So much so that it's kind of difficult to drink on its own, and people over there don't really drink it on its own. Um, I remember there was this one at the supermarket. There was this they import it because it's not native to Britain, and it said on the can, this is Canada Dry, but it says "Bring the fire." I forget the brand of it, but it's like written in sort of a Jamaican uh, accent phonetically, and they weren't joking. Um, So anyway, um, today I just wanted to talk about something that's been sort of on my mind over the last couple of days, and it's trying to find motivation when you don't have any. In the last video, I talked about losing a job, and that can be very stressful. I already have like health stresses, not major ones, but something to keep an eye on. And then I worry about my wife a little bit. I'm still trying to get over my mom dying recently. My dad, I'm a little worried about. I don't know how he does on his own. Like historically, he sort of had to be looked after by my mom, and now he's on his own. So he seems to be holding up a little bit, but on the other hand, uh, it just seems like the whole world is sort of falling apart on me, and I suppose in a earlier time in my life when I was younger, uh, I probably would have panicked. Even a couple years ago, I probably would have panicked. Um, and I did panic. Um, and right now, all the alarms are going off. Beep, beep, beep. Um, but I'm trying to keep it cool. I'm trying to keep it together because panic just kind of it sets everyone off around you. Not that I have very many people around me. Over the years, I've made friends and gone my separate way on my own, or they went on their own. And you know how it is today that people move so much. It's hard to keep friends and keep track of them. And the only way to keep track of them is on social media. And that's social media is just absolute toxic. It's a terrible place where people just scream their opinions at each other, and then when they don't get the reaction they scream even louder at each other and resort to bad names. Um, so as far as myself, I'm not really sure what to do. I applied for unemployment. I've been applying to jobs. Um, I've been doing a course online about Python, which is a programming language, and I'm trying to do whatever I can, but at the same time, while I notice that I'm actually doing the things I need to be doing, I still feel in the back of my mind that something's not right. I'm missing something, and I don't I don't know what that is. Um, I've been reading a lot. Unfortunately, in the city of Philadelphia, from what I've been able to piece together, the library system really got gutted during coronavirus, and they pretty much shrunk up the opening hours during when they're open. And there are probably about 20, 30 branches in Philadelphia, I think, something like that. And most of them are only open Monday to Friday, like 9 to 5 or something like that. There might be the odd one that's open on a Saturday for like 4 hours or something like that, but it's also out in like Mount Airy, which is like on the complete opposite end of the city of where I live. And I, when I was working, I just couldn't make it to these places, and so I kind of had to read books that I had around the house. And I was reading a book. So my wife would drop me off at work at like 7:30. I didn't start work until 9 o'clock. And on the nice days, I would sit on a bench right behind the building, a sort of shaded area. So if it was warm, um, at least it wasn't too sunny that I would bake out there. And I was reading a book, and I read a couple books, and I started reading a book by a man named Studs Terkel called The Good War. And it's interviews that he conducted uh, with people who were either in the war, something ancillary to the war, like women who were in the USO, people who worked for the president, people who worked, who like little kids who lived in Hawaii during the Pearl Harbor bombings. Anyway, it's a really interesting book, but after a while, it gets a little bit heavy because you start hearing stories about people dying. Obviously, that's what happens in a war, and uh, it just got a little too heavy, especially with the hard scare and just like there's all this heavy shit in my life. I just didn't need to read that much of it. And the thing is, you can do it in little chunks because each interview is only like 2 or 3 pages long, and I've been sort of whittling away at it, but I found myself not really wanting to read it. So my wife had a book about cheese, which I started reading, which was really um, I like cheese. What can I say? And it was it found I found myself just sort of not really like getting into it, but just sort of enjoying it for um a dumb read. Like I wasn't going to be a cheesemaker. In a previous life, I worked in a cheese shop, a wine and cheese shop. So I know my way around the cheese, but it was just kind of nice to just have something that didn't get you down. It didn't. You didn't feel like you were being like. If I read a history book, I feel like I'm back at university reading for comprehension because I'm going to be tested on this. So how am I going to formulate an essay on this? I still did that with history books. I read a ton of history books, and I suppose that's a good way of thinking about a book. But sometimes you just kind of don't want to feel like you're at school when you read it. This ginger ale is going fast. Um, um, so I I found that yeah, okay, maybe keep the depressing books to a minimum. I can't watch dramas. I can't watch depressing movies. Um, I just read a book, a, a Greek play called Trojan Women, which is really depressing. Um, so, but it was part of my reading program. I think I mentioned that in the last video. But now I'm on to Plato, which is not depressing at all. It's actually kind of fun, but it's a little. I think Plato kind of labors his points. So anyway, it's not. Uh, because you read for comprehension in a book. So say you're reading Macbeth. Like there's a play, the tragedy that a lot of people know, where there's a lot of killing, there's a lot of ambition, like that for things that aren't yours. Like so, Macbeth is basically told by these witches that he's going to be king of Scotland, and he might have to do some bad things to do it. And it just sort of gets in his head, and he convinces his wife that this is going to be happening. So they basically they go kill the king. They chase off the king's sons, and then he becomes king because he's the king's cousin. And then, in order to stay the king, he has to kill more people, and then it just sort of eats into his brain and his soul, and it's not good for you. And there's a fundamental understanding that Shakespeare has in the human nature that he shows in plays like Macbeth and Hamlet, and but there's a sort of meta understanding that happens. So not only are you reading this and understanding, but you're thinking about these things in the abstract about death and about murder and ambition and jealousy and things like that. And too much of that is just a really bad thing for the soul. And unfortunately, like a lot of TV, a lot of movies, um, they involve just heavy shit like that, and I can't do anything about it. The only thing that I can do is not participate. So I try to avoid those things like the plague. So my wife and I have basically just stuck to comedies, like just dumb, silly movies or dumb, silly TV shows. We're watching The Golden Girls, which, incidentally, I had not seen The Golden Girls since it was on TV back in the 80s. Maybe it was on reruns or something like that. I don't really remember. But I remember I was like, oh yeah, it's a bunch of old women and they get up to, whatever. And then there was some heavy stuff in there where uh they talk about dementia, they talk about sickness, they talk about their children not being what they want them to be, or their lives not ending up because Dorothy, the tall one, um got divorced because her husband cheated on her, and it's just the heavy crap that goes with that. It's just like, okay, all right, I have to sit through this because not everything is just going to be just you know knock knock jokes. So anyway, what so um I basically have had to shut out a lot of the negative crap in the walls, which means I don't watch news, I don't listen to news, I don't read news, only like sports news or music news. I I'm basically just I feel bad because it feels like I'm sort of like an ostrich sticking my head in the ground just to avoid reality. I know that's not what they really do, but the metaphor is that. And but honestly, what is the point of watching the news? Is what am I going to do with this information? I mean, when come election time, I guess I'll do a little bit of research if I'm going to vote, but ultimately, it doesn't matter. I can't do anything about it. And then once I read it, I'm just pissed off. And that's all the news is there to piss you off. And what's the point of that? You know? Um, so I, I figured out what not to do in life, But as far as like getting motivated to do stuff, I'm having quite a difficult time getting motivated because it's humiliating to lose your job. It's humiliating to being dependent on your wife. It's humiliating, because ultimately, you go to somebody. Let's just say you start talking to someone. I say, oh, well, what do you do? It always comes up. You say, well, I'm unemployed. And then that basically just either kills the conversation or changes the way they look at you. And it's really depressing because it feels like it's almost like someone's pulling a leash on you. Like, don't even have conversations with people because ultimately you're going to be humiliated. Um, so, not that pride or something like that is a motivating factor. It's more about the pain. Um, I never really cared that people were, uh, if they admired what I did, is more the pain. I don't want the pain of someone looking at me like I'm a loser. And uh, it's quite difficult because that's always on your mind. It's in your mind no matter what you do. And so I think, it's if you're looking for advice, you're not going to get it here. I'm just sort of talking to get my thoughts out of my head, but I'm not really coming to any conclusion. So motivation is, I guess, if you're going to think about motivation, well, how do you get motivated? Well, what do you want to do, right? If you're motivated to sit on the couch all day, well, then you just have to do it. But um, I think motivation is a really there's a psychological aspect to it, and then there's even like an instinctual aspect to it. Now the thing is, I just went for a run. You can tell by my wet hair here that I just got out of the shower, and I I went for a run, and then I got home and I'm like, I didn't even really think about going for a run. Not in a deep way. I didn't sit there and plan out my route. I just kind of left the house, and then suddenly I found myself running. I'm not a big runner. I don't run really long distances. I run mostly because it's a physical activity and you should probably do something. I feel a bit healthier now. When you start running, I don't know if anybody else feels this. I can almost like taste blood in my breath, like in the back of my throat. And I don't know what that is. Maybe something to do with the lungs. But after a while, when you get in better shape and you don't feel winded after running just around the block or something like that, you that goes away. And as does sort of the cramps. I suppose that if you run a long distance, you are going to get cramps. And there's no avoiding it. But I only run like a few miles before I was like, all right, I'm done. I don't measure how far I go. I don't time myself. I kind of stick to one route, maybe like the back, the reverse of the route. I've got like two or three different things if I want to go a shorter run or a slightly longer run. I have options, but I try to keep south of where I am because there's just less traffic I have to run into and less worrying I have to do about getting run over. Because drivers in Philadelphia do not give a shit about you if you are a pedestrian. And so that always has to be on your mind. Now, I don't really know what to do with that, as far as I can't. It does get a little monotonous when I'm in the same route. But anyway, the point is that I run this and I don't even know I'm doing it. So there's a motivation. It's almost like it's a habit. It's a habit that you don't even think about. But I had to have started that habit, obviously. And that was the hardest part of it. I don't really get injured, so it's not like I have to fight an injury to get back out there. I did have coronavirus a couple weeks ago, so that laid me out for a little bit. Um, and I so I think there's two aspects of this. It's like to find the thing that you want to do, and then figure out, well, do you really want this thing? So I don't even know where to begin, to be honest with you. It's not so much of motivation I need to do something specific. It's almost like there's a listlessness to me that I just don't feel up to it. Up to what? Up to much of anything. Although I do find myself doing a lot. I do um, my blog, I do my reading, I do my running, I cook. So I do things, but these are habits they're long established habits, and I don't even know what to do beyond that. I think ultimately there's a lack of meaning in my life. I think work tends to give you a lot of meaning, but I've never really found a lot of meaning in any of the work I've ever done. Mostly because when I was a teacher, students don't give a shit. When I worked in offices, you just get this feeling like nobody's reading the reports I'm writing. Uh, I'm publishing data that no one will ever see. They won't even know that all of the effort and I put into it just to make it a little bit better. It's kind of demotivating when you look at the sort of sheer pointlessness of your work. I suppose the real motivation is the paycheck, but you can do anything for a paycheck. And I feel like any job that I'm going to get next is going to be some version of what I've done previously. And I it's funny that it's, speaking of meaning and motivation, I think that they often can get solved by something in the workplace called culture. And I've been lucky enough to work in, let's say, maybe two places where there was a culture where you liked and respected people who you worked with. And these weren't high level jobs. They weren't minimum wage, but they weren't high level jobs. And it didn't matter who I worked with that day. Because it was shift work. It didn't matter who I worked with. I was going to have a good time. I would show up to work, and it wasn't. I mean, there was work to do, and sometimes it was hard, and sometimes it was annoying. But I didn't really just think, oh, another day of this. Um, and I guess that's what I'm looking for. Is something where I'm eager to go to work. Yeah, I'm happy to come home, but ultimately, I don't hate my life. And it doesn't like rot. It doesn't rot the rest of your life. So anyway, that's about all I've got today. Speaking of motivating, talking about your problems makes you want to run away from them. So I've talked enough about them. I will probably talk to you next week. So see you soon. Bye.